My name is Corinne Baptiste. I'm 33. 2 months ago, I sat in a loan officer's office with my hands folded in my lap, waiting to hear whether I'd been approved for the mortgage I had spent 6 years saving for, and instead of an approval, I got a question. The loan officer, a careful woman named Denise, turned her monitor slightly toward me and asked if I could explain 3 evictions filed against me in the last 11 years. 3. In 3 different states. States I had never lived in. Addresses I had never seen. A rental history that belonged, on paper, entirely to me, and that I was encountering, in full, for the very first time, at 33 years old, in a beige office with fluorescent lighting, while the number that was supposed to represent the most stable financial proof of my adult life quietly fell apart on a screen turned toward me like evidence in a trial I hadn't known I was standing in. Before I tell you whose name was actually on those leases, and what it took to find out, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Only if this is landing somewhere real. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to that room, and then further back, to where this actually started. Denise didn't accuse me of anything. I want to be clear about that because it matters to how the next several weeks unfolded. She turned the monitor, and she said, "This is what came back on the tenant screening report, and I need you to help me understand it, because as it stands, I can't move your application forward." I looked at the screen. 3 lines. An eviction filed in Reno, Nevada, in 2015. An eviction filed in Tucson, Arizona, in 2018. An eviction filed in Charlotte, North Carolina, in 2021. My name, Corinne Baptiste, spelled correctly, attached to all 3. My date of birth, listed on 2 of the 3, matching mine exactly. I had never lived in Reno. I had never lived in Tucson. I had lived in Charlotte for exactly 4 months in 2019, in an apartment I left in good standing, with a deposit returned in full, a fact I could prove because I still had the email confirming it. Said, "This isn't me." Denise said, "I understand that's what it feels like, and I want to help you sort it out, but I need you to know that from where I sit, I can't approve a mortgage against a rental history with 3 unresolved evictions on it, regardless of what you and I believe personally about whether they're accurate." I said, "What do I do?" She said, "You dispute it. With the screening company, and with each court directly. It can take time." I said, "How much time?" She said, "It depends on how cooperative the courts are and how quickly you can produce documentation." I said, "Documentation of what?" She said, "Of where you actually lived during those years. Your own history." To disprove theirs, I left that office and sat in my car in the parking lot for 11 minutes before I could make myself start the engine. I want to tell you about those 11 minutes because I think they're the real beginning of this story, more than the office itself. I sat there running through every apartment I had lived in since I was 22. A studio in Baltimore, 2012 through 2014, landlord Mr. Okafor, a wonderful man, sent me a Christmas card every year until he passed. A shared place in Richmond, 2014 through 2017, 2 roommates, a lease I still had a PDF of somewhere in an old email account. My own 1-bedroom in Richmond, 2017 through 2019. The 4 months in Charlotte. And then, since 2019, the apartment I still live in now, 5 years running, rent paid on time every single month, a fact my current landlord would confirm without hesitation if anyone asked her. Nowhere in that history was there a version of me that had lived in Reno or Tucson. I don't know a single person in Reno. I have been to Tucson exactly once, for a work conference, 4 days, a hotel with a rooftop pool. I remember because the water was too warm to be refreshing. So who was I, according to 3 separate county court systems? During the years I was actually building a completely different, completely ordinary, completely documented life somewhere else. I need to tell you about my family before I tell you what I found, because the answer to that question runs directly through people I have loved my entire life, and understanding who they are is the only way the rest of this makes any sense. I'm the oldest of 3. My parents, Marcel and Odile Baptiste, raised us in a row house in Baltimore that they still own, that they bought in 1988 with money my grandmother lent them and that my father paid back, in full, with interest. He insisted on adding, even though my grandmother told him not to, because he said a debt without interest isn't respect, it's charity, and I don't want charity from my mother. That is the kind of family I come from. Careful. Proud in a specific, load-bearing way. The kind of pride that makes asking for help feel, to the people in it, like a small moral failure rather than an ordinary human need. And my younger brother, Desmond, is 30. My younger sister, Amara, is 28. I have always been close with both of them, in the specific uneven way that siblings are close, meaning I know things about them that they haven't told our parents, and they know things about me. And there has always been an unspoken agreement in our family that the 3 of us handle certain things among ourselves before those things ever reach Marcel and Odile, because our parents worry in a way that costs them something physical, our mother especially, who has a heart condition that the whole family has quietly organized itself around protecting her from unnecessary stress. Desmond has struggled with stability for most of his adult life. I want to say that plainly and without cruelty, because it is simply true, and because the specific shape of his instability is the center of everything that follows. He has held jobs. He has lost jobs. He has had periods of real promise, 18 months at a logistics company where he was actually thriving, followed by periods where something would go sideways, a missed rent payment, a car repossession, a falling out with a roommate, and he would call one of us, usually me, in a voice that had a specific quality I had learned to recognize over 15 years, a voice that meant he needed something and was ashamed of needing it, helped him when I could. Not with money, mostly, because I didn't have much extra money for most of those years, but with things. Letting him stay on my couch for 3 weeks in 2016 while he found a new place. Co-signing a phone plan in 2017 because his credit was too damaged to get one on his own. Driving 4 hours to help him move out of a place in 2019 that had gone bad in a way he wouldn't fully explain, what I did not know, sitting in that loan officer's office in 2015, 2018, and 2021, respectively, was that during each of those specific years, my brother had been using my identity, my full legal name and my date of birth, to sign leases in cities where he was living and I was not. Found this out slowly, over roughly 5 weeks, and I want to walk you through exactly how, because the process itself matters, and because I think there's something useful in it for anyone who ever finds themselves needing to prove a negative, needing to prove that you were not somewhere, that you were not someone, when the paper trail says otherwise. The first thing I did, the day after the loan office appointment, was request the actual court records for all 3 evictions, which meant 3 separate calls, to 3 separate county clerk offices, in 3 states I had never lived in, each of them requiring me to explain, to a stranger on the phone, that I needed records of a case filed against a version of me that I did not believe existed. The Reno clerk was brisk and unbothered, the specific efficient indifference of someone who processes requests like mine more often than you'd think. She told me the case file would be mailed within 10 business days. The Tucson clerk needed a notarized request. The Charlotte clerk, once I clarified that I actually had lived in Charlotte but not at the address on the eviction filing, put me on hold for 11 minutes and came back with a supervisor. While I waited for the records, I did something else, something I am not proud of in the sense that it required a level of suspicion toward my own brother that felt, at the time, like a betrayal of him even though it turned out to be the opposite. I called Desmond. I didn't lead with the accusation. I want you to understand that, because I think it matters to how the conversation actually went. I called him on a Thursday evening, and I said, "Hey, I need to ask you something, and I need you to just answer me honestly, no matter what the honest answer is." He said, "Okay, that sounds ominous." "What's up?" I said, "Did you ever live in Reno, Nevada, in 2015? There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough that I felt something drop in my stomach before he even answered. He said, "Why are you asking me that?" I said, "Because there's an eviction filed against my name in Reno in 2015, and I have never been to Reno in my life." The silence that followed lasted, by my count, close to 10 seconds. Then he said, in a voice that had gone very quiet, "Corinne, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you say anything, because I've been carrying this for a long time, and if you stop me I don't know if I'll be able to start again." I let him talk. He told me that in 2015, he had been in Reno for a job that fell through almost immediately after he arrived, a logistics position he'd relocated for on the promise of a signing bonus that never materialized, and he had needed an apartment fast, with almost no income and a credit score that had already been damaged by a previous default. He said the leasing office wouldn't approve him under his own name. He said a friend he'd made out there, someone he'd known only a few months, told him about a workaround, using a family member's information as a sort of informal cosigner without actually telling the family member, just entering their name and date of birth on the application in place of running an additional credit check under his own worse numbers. He said he knew my birthday. He said he had, from some old shared document years earlier, a copy of my driver's license that I had sent him once for an unrelated reason, to help him verify something for our mother's insurance. He said he used it to, he said, "I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I'd catch up on rent within a few months, prove myself, and it would just quietly become a normal lease under my own name." He said it didn't work out that way. He said he fell behind within 4 months, got served with an eviction notice, and by that point, he said, I panicked, because I knew if I told you what I'd done, it wasn't just going to be about the money anymore. It was going to be about the fact that I'd used your name without asking, and I didn't know how to say that to you, so I didn't say anything, and I moved to Tucson a few months later, and Corinne, I did it again. I want to tell you what it felt like to hear that sentence. I did it again. Not because the second admission was more painful than the first, but because it told me, instantly, that this wasn't a single moment of panic. It was a pattern. A structure he had built, quietly, across years, using a version of me that existed only on paper, in courthouses I had never entered, to absorb consequences he could not absorb under his own name. He told me about Tucson. Same mechanism, a slightly more elaborate version of it because by then he'd apparently learned which corners of an application process were checked carefully and which were not. He told me about Charlotte, which was the one that hollowed me out the most, because Charlotte was a city I had actually lived in, briefly, in 2019, and he told me that he'd used my name there too, in an apartment complex on the other side of the city from where I'd actually lived, during an overlapping window of months, meaning that for a period of roughly 6 weeks, there were 2 Corinne Baptistes technically residing in Charlotte, North Carolina, one of them paying her own rent responsibly 4 miles from downtown, and one of them falling behind on payments in an apartment she'd never seen, both of them, on paper, the same person. I said, "Desmond, why? Not why did you do it the first time, panic explains a first time. Why did you keep doing it?" He said, because it worked, the first time, in the sense that it got me housing when nothing else would, and I told myself each time that it would be different, that I'd catch up, and each time I didn't, and each time I was too ashamed of the pattern to tell you, because telling you about the third one would have meant telling you about the first two, and by then it felt like a hole so deep I didn't know how to hand you a shovel without also handing you the whole shape of what I'd buried. Asked him if he understood what those 3 lines had just done to me, sitting in a loan officer's office, 33 years old, 6 years of saving, watching a mortgage I had earned entirely through my own documented, boring, responsible history collapse because of a version of me he had constructed to survive his own crises. He said, "I understand it now, hearing you describe it, in a way I don't think I let myself understand it while I was doing it." He said, "I told myself it was borrowing your name the way I used to borrow your car, temporary, harmless, something you wouldn't even notice." He said, "I didn't let myself think about what it would look like on the other end, when you actually needed your own name to be clean, did not yell at my brother on that phone call." I want to tell you that honestly because I think it surprised both of us. What I felt was not the hot immediate anger I might have expected. It was something colder and slower, the specific grief of realizing that someone you have protected your entire life has, in a moment of his own desperation, used the protection itself as a resource, has reached into the one thing that was supposed to be uniquely and safely mine, my own legal identity, and treated it as a shared family asset rather than as a boundary. I told him I needed time before I decided what came next. He said he understood. He said, "Whatever you need to do, Corinne, to fix this on your end, I'll cooperate with all of it. Affidavits, court filings, whatever it takes. I'm not going to make this harder than it already is. I want to tell you about the 5 weeks that followed, because they were not simple, and because the specific mechanics of proving that someone else committed identity fraud against you, even when that someone is your own brother and even when he cooperates fully, are more grueling than I expected." The court records arrived. Reno first, then Charlotte, then Tucson. Each file contained the original lease applications, and on each one, in a handwriting that was recognizably not mine, close enough to pass a casual glance but distinct enough that a forensic document examiner, which I eventually hired, could identify clear differences in letter formation, particularly in the specific way the writer formed a lowercase g, a habit Desmond has had since childhood that our mother used to tease him about, a small loop that curls back on itself in a way mine never has. I filed identity theft reports with the FTC for each incident, a process that generates a specific affidavit document designed exactly for situations like mine, and I filed police reports in Baltimore, where I actually reside, referencing the fraudulent use of my identity in 3 other states, which the responding officer told me was more common than I would think, family members using each other's identities in moments of financial crisis, though he was careful to say that common did not mean simple to untangle. I worked with an attorney who specializes in tenant screening disputes, a recommendation from Denise, the loan officer, who I want to specifically credit here because she did not have to go out of her way to help me and she did anyway, staying in contact throughout the process, checking in periodically, treating my situation as something worth her continued attention rather than a closed file she'd already flagged as a problem. The attorney helped me draft formal dispute letters to the tenant screening company that had compiled the report, attaching the FTC affidavits, the police reports, and, eventually, sworn statements from Desmond himself, admitting in writing, under penalty of perjury, that he had used my identity without my knowledge or consent to execute all 3 leases. Want to pause here and tell you what it cost Desmond to write those statements, because I think it matters to the fuller picture of who he is, separate from what he did. He did not hesitate. He did not ask for softer language. He drove to Baltimore on a Saturday, sat at our parents' kitchen table, the same table where the 2 of us used to do algebra homework side by side, and wrote out, in his own hand, a full account of each incident, dates, addresses, the mechanism he'd used, and signed it in front of a notary I'd arranged. He said, while he was signing it, "I know this doesn't undo what it cost you. I just need there to be a real document that says the truth plainly, because you've spent 5 weeks proving a negative, and I think you deserve at least one piece of paper in this whole mess that just says what actually happened, without you having to fight for it." The screening company's dispute process took another 6 weeks beyond that point. 2 of the 3 eviction records were removed entirely once the courts themselves updated their filings to reflect the fraud finding, a process that required each court, separately, to review the evidence and issue what's effectively a correction to the public record. The third, Charlotte, took longest, because it required distinguishing between the lease I had actually held in the city and the fraudulent one Desmond had executed under my name during an overlapping period, and the court wanted additional documentation proving I had been elsewhere, meaning I had to produce my own actual lease, my own utility bills, my own employer's confirmation of my work location during those months, essentially building a complete alibi for my own life to disprove a life I had never lived. All 3 records were cleared. My mortgage application, resubmitted 4 months after that first meeting with Denise, went through without complication. I want to tell you that the 4-month delay cost me the specific interest rate I would have gotten in the original window, a real financial cost, several $1,000s over the life of the loan, small compared to some of the numbers in the stories I've told on this channel before, but not nothing, and not a cost I would have paid if my identity had simply remained mine. Want to tell you about the conversation I eventually had with my parents, because I made a deliberate choice to have it. Even though Desmond initially asked me not to, worried specifically about our mother's heart condition and what the stress of it might do to her, I told him, gently but clearly, that I understood his concern and shared it, but that I was not willing to carry a secret of this size alone to protect 2 people who deserved to know the truth about their own son, especially because I believed, and told him directly, that our mother's health would not be protected by not knowing. It would only be protected by knowing in a setting where she felt safe and supported rather than finding out some other way, later, in a worse context. He told them together, at that same kitchen table, on a Sunday afternoon. My father's face did something I had never seen it do before, a kind of controlled stillness that I recognized, only after watching it for a while, as him working very hard not to let his first reaction be the one that came out of his mouth. My mother cried, but not the way I feared. She cried the way people cry when a fear they have been carrying quietly for years, some unnamed worry about Desmond's instability, finally producing a consequence too large to fix privately, is finally given a specific shape they can actually respond to. My father said, to Desmond, directly, "Why didn't you come to us?" Desmond said, "Because I didn't want you to know how bad it had gotten." My father said, "We already knew it was bad, son. We just didn't know how bad." I think a version of us thought not asking too many questions was a kind of kindness. Desmond said, "It wasn't kindness, Dad, it was just quiet, and I let the quiet become a place I could hide things in. I want to tell you where things stand now, because the resolution is not a clean bow, and I think presenting it as one would be dishonest. My mortgage closed. I am, as of 6 weeks ago, a homeowner, in a modest house 40 minutes outside Baltimore, with a rate that is not the rate I would have gotten without the 4-month delay but is a rate I can live with, in a house that is mine, under a name that is finally, fully, verifiably, only mine. Desmond has started, slowly, a formal credit counseling program, something our whole family encouraged but that he ultimately chose on his own, and he has been transparent, in a way he was not before, about his financial situation in real time rather than in retrospect, which I think is the actual meaningful change, not the absence of struggle but the presence of honesty about it while it's happening. Our relationship is not what it was before I sat in that loan officer's office. I want to be honest about that too. There is a specific new carefulness between us, not coldness, but a kind of conscious boundary setting that didn't exist when we were younger, when I would have let him stay on my couch without a second thought or co-signed another phone plan without asking a single follow-up question. I love my brother. I have forgiven him, in the specific sense of no longer carrying active anger toward him day to day. But forgiveness and restored trust are not the same transaction, and I have told him plainly that trust, this time, is going to have to be rebuilt slowly, through years of small consistent honesty, rather than assumed the way it used to be assumed simply because we share parents and a childhood bedroom wall. I want to talk to you directly now, wherever you are, whatever time it is. I sat in a mortgage office at 33 years old and watched a version of my life I had never lived appear on a screen as though it were more real than the actual life I had spent 6 careful years building. That is a specific, disorienting kind of violation, the sense that your own name, the single thing that is supposed to be unambiguously and only yours, can be quietly borrowed by someone who shares your blood and used to absorb consequences you never created. If you have ever co-signed something for a family member, or shared identifying information with someone you loved and trusted completely, I am not telling you to stop trusting the people you love. I am telling you that trust and access are two different things, and it is possible to love someone with your whole heart while still being careful about which pieces of your paperwork you hand them, because the people who love us are not always, in their most desperate moments, thinking about what it will cost us later. Sometimes they are only thinking about how to survive today, and if today requires borrowing tomorrow from someone who trusts them, some people will do it, and mean well while doing it, and still leave you sitting in a beige office years later, proving that you were never actually in Reno. I check my credit report every month now. Not out of anxiety. Out of the specific hard-won practice of a woman who learned, at 33, that her own name required active maintenance, the same way a house does, the same way a relationship does, the same way anything worth protecting eventually requires you to actually check on it rather than simply assume it's still standing the way you left it. T-Hat is today's story on the Family Ledge. Leave a comment wherever you are watching from. Tell me what time it is, and tell me if you check your own credit report regularly, or if this story just convinced you that you should start. I read every single one. Subscribe for the next story every week. Check the description for another one I think you will connect with. Thank you for being here.